Today, we're diving into the story of one of modern history's most transformative and, let's be honest, most controversial figures, Margaret Thatcher. As Britain's first female prime minister, she didn't just want to lead the country, she wanted to fundamentally remake it from the ground up.
This one line, delivered to her party back in 1980, it says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly sums up the image of Margaret Thatcher. Totally resolute, absolutely uncompromising, and completely convinced she was on the right path. This became the rallying cry of a political revolution.
So that's the big question for us today. How on earth did the daughter of a small-town grocer climb to the very top? How did she get that famous nickname, the Iron Lady, from a Soviet journalist, and then go on to completely reshape the economic and social fabric of Britain? Well, that's the story we're about to unpack. To really get a handle on the politician she became, we have to start where she did, and that's not in the grand halls of power, but in a small town called Grantham. This is where it all began. Not in some elite private school or an old boys' club at Oxford, but right here, living above a grocery shop. Margaret Roberts was raised on the values of her father's small business. You work hard, you rely on yourself, and you watch every penny. And you know, these weren't just things she learned as a kid. They became the absolute bedrock of her entire political worldview. Now, her deeply held personal convictions were about to collide with a moment of profound national crisis. To understand her rise, you first have to understand the state of Britain she was about to inherit, a country in total turmoil.
You know, by the late 1970s, Britain was widely known as the sick man of Europe. The country was basically paralyzed by what was called the Winter of Discontent. We're talking about a period of massive, crippling strikes that left garbage piling up in the streets and, believe it or not, the dead going unburied. The whole mood of the country was just one of despair. It was in this climate that the Conservative Party rolled out a campaign with a simple, brutally effective slogan, "Labor isn't working." The nation was desperate for change, and that threw the door wide open for a new kind of leader promising a radical cure.
And the cure she was offering, well, it wasn't just a slight change in direction. It was a complete economic and social revolution, and it all came to be known by one name, Thatcherism. So what is Thatcherism exactly? Well, at its core, it was a total rejection of what was called the post-war consensus. This idea that everyone had basically agreed on since World War II, where the government should run key industries and provide a big welfare state. Thatcher's idea was the opposite. Instead of state control, she believed in the free market. The goal was to shrink the state by selling off huge nationalized companies like British Telecom and British Gas, break the power of the trade unions, and create a new culture of individual enterprise. Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, because this slide shows you it wasn't just talk. The numbers tell the story. While the economy did grow and spending on things like law and order and health went up, look at the other side. You see a massive slashing of government support for industry and housing. This was a fundamental rewiring of what the British government's job was.
But, and this is a huge but, this economic shock therapy came with a staggering social price tag. As old government-backed industries like coal mining and shipbuilding were basically left to die, unemployment just exploded, hitting levels not seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We're talking about entire towns and communities being hollowed out, leaving behind social scars that for many people have never really healed.
But at the very same time, Thatcherism was creating a completely new social landscape. Selling off public housing to the people who lived in them and privatizing all those big industries created a huge boom in home and share ownership. The dream was to create a share-owning democracy, and as you can see, the percentage of adults owning shares more than tripled while she was in power. Thatcher's time in office wasn't just shaped by economic theory, though. It was really forged in the fire of real-world conflict, both thousands of miles away and right there at home. Two events, more than any others, really cemented her reputation. First up, the Falklands War in 1982. When Argentina invaded, her decisive, unapologetic military response led to a quick victory and sent her popularity soaring. Then came the miners' strike in 1984. This was a brutal year-long showdown that she saw not just as a labor dispute, but as a battle for the very soul of the country. And her victory utterly broke the back of the trade union movement. And listen to this quote, because it tells you everything you need to know about her mindset. She directly linked the two fights. To her, the striking miners were the enemy within, a threat to the nation's freedom that was just as dangerous as a foreign army. It's a jaw-dropping statement that reveals both the absolute conviction and the deep, deep division that was at the heart of her politics. So, after winning 3 huge landslide elections, you'd think she was invincible, right? Well, her downfall came surprisingly fast. And the irony is, it was caused by the exact same unbending conviction that had fueled her rise to power in the first place. The thing that finally did it was a policy called the poll tax. It was a flat-rate tax meant to make local councils more accountable, but to the public, it just seemed incredibly unfair. The idea that a rich duke would pay the same amount as a janitor sparked mass protests, even riots, and her political support just collapsed. For once, the lady who was not for turning had pushed things too far. But the final blow didn't come from the opposition. It came from inside her own party. Her longtime colleague Geoffrey Howe gave this absolutely devastating resignation speech. He used this famous cricketing metaphor to basically paint her as a destructive captain who was sabotaging her own team over arguments about Europe. That speech was the spark that lit the fuse for a leadership challenge she knew she couldn't win.
And just like that, after 11.5 years, the longest-serving prime minister of the 20th century, it was all over. From that historic win in '79 through the defining wars and strikes of the '80s to her dramatic fall in 1990, she had completely and utterly changed Britain.
So, who was she really? I think this quote from her biographer, John Campbell, just nails the whole debate. There is no middle ground on Margaret Thatcher. Was she the savior who rescued a broken country, or was she a divisive leader who fractured society? The fascinating and maybe frustrating thing is that both of those views can be seen as true depending on who you ask. And that leaves us with the final question, doesn't it? The old consensus she tore down has never been rebuilt. The free market, privatized economy she created is still, for the most part, the one Britain has today. So, was she a savior or an ideologue? Maybe the best way to answer that is to look at Britain right now and ask yourself, what do you think is her most enduring legacy?